There are wars we remember, wars that shape borders and destinies, victories we celebrate, defeats that humble empires. But sometimes, hidden within the thunder of artillery and the clash of armies, there are moments so human, so tender, that they transcend the conflict itself. This is the story of such a moment. In 1954, in a remote valley in northern Vietnam, tens of thousands of soldiers were locked in a siege that would end France's colonial era. It was a place where hope evaporated, where supplies ran out, and where death became routine. Yet in the center of this nightmare, one woman, a young French nurse, chose to remain, chose to stay with the wounded when she could have escaped. Her name was Geneviève de Galard. To the soldiers who watched her work amid the mud, the blood, and the endless bombardment, she became something more than a caregiver. She became a symbol of humanity, a quiet presence in the chaos. They called her the Angel of Dien. In this video, we'll retrace her journey, explore the siege that changed history, and discover why her courage remains an enduring legacy of compassion in war. After the Second World War, the world was reshaped by decolonization. Across Asia and Africa, nations long under European control rose up to claim independence. In French Indochina, modern Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia, a fierce independence movement had taken hold. The Viet Minh, a coalition of nationalists and communists under Ho Chi Minh, were determined to drive the French out, no matter the cost. To many in Paris, Indochina was still a jewel of the empire, rich in resources, strategically vital. But to the Vietnamese people, it was their homeland, and the war would become one of the bloodiest struggles of the 20th century. By the early 1950s, French forces were fighting a brutal guerrilla war in dense jungles and mountains. Patrols vanished in the mist, convoys were ambushed, morale sank as casualties mounted. The French command believed a decisive showdown could finally break the Viet Minh. They chose a place called Dien, a remote valley surrounded by jungle-clad hills. From the air, it looked like a perfect trap, and it was. The plan was simple: parachute in thousands of troops, build an airbase, and force the Viet Minh to attack in the open. It was a gamble, and for many young soldiers and nurses, it was their first time witnessing the scale of colonial warfare.
Among the ranks of the French Air Force was Geneviève de Galard, just 28 years old. Born in Toulouse in 1925, Geneviève grew up during the German occupation of France. She knew what it meant to live with fear. Her family's experiences in the resistance shaped her sense of duty and resilience. She trained as an anesthetist, specializing in treating the most severe trauma cases. When she joined the Air Force, she volunteered for some of the most dangerous missions, flying into combat zones to rescue the wounded. By 1953, she had already completed more than 100 evacuation flights. Her job was relentless. Climb aboard a C-47 Dakota, fly into the jungle under threat of anti-aircraft fire, and keep men alive as the plane raced back to Hanoi. Those who served with her described her as calm, professional, and utterly devoted. She had a quiet determination that inspired the crews around her. For many wounded men, her face was the first kind one they saw after days in the field. In early 1954, as preparations began for Dien Bien Phu, Geneviève was assigned to the unit that would evacuate casualties from the coming battle. She knew the risks, but she never hesitated. On March 13, 1954, the sky over Dien Bien Phu erupted in fire. General Vo Nguyen Giap, the Viet Minh commander, had spent months dragging heavy artillery into the jungle-covered hills. Hundreds of pieces, howitzers, anti-aircraft guns, mortars, were dug into hidden bunkers, perfectly positioned to rain destruction on the French positions below. The opening bombardment was devastating. In a single night, the Viet Minh overran key outposts. The airstrip, the French lifeline to the outside world, was cratered and nearly unusable. From that moment, Dien Bien Phu was effectively cut off. Every supply and every evacuation flight risked being shot down. Yet the wounded continued to pile up. Genevieve's C-47 made repeated flights into the besieged valley. By night, they navigated by flares and radio beacons, landing under sporadic fire. She recalled stepping down onto the runway, her boots sinking into mud, streaked with blood and oil. The field hospital was little more than a collection of tents and dugouts. Overworked surgeons labored around the clock. Supplies dwindled rapidly. Antibiotics, bandages, even morphine became precious commodities. Still, Genevieve and her colleagues did everything they could, triaging the wounded, performing amputations, comforting the dying. The French command assured them that relief was coming, that reinforcements would soon break the siege. But deep down, many knew the truth. They were alone. On March 28th, Genevieve's plane landed as usual to deliver medical supplies. The plan was to evacuate casualties before dawn. But in the darkness, Viet Minh artillery found its target. A shell smashed into the C-47, destroying the engines and leaving the aircraft a smoldering ruin. Genevieve was now trapped inside the valley. For many, the realization would have caused panic or despair. But she simply gathered her kit, walked to the field hospital, and reported for duty. In her mind, there was only one path forward: help as many as she could. Over the next 6 weeks, she worked almost without rest. 12-hour shifts blurred into 20-hour marathons. She sterilized equipment over small kerosene stoves. She prepared bandages from scraps of cloth. She administered anesthesia during surgeries carried out by candlelight. When the shelling was too intense to stand, she crouched by the patients, covering them with her body. One soldier later said, "In that place, she was the only light." Her selflessness became legend among the men. To them, she was proof that compassion could exist even in the most hopeless place on earth. As the siege dragged on, Genevieve's reputation grew. Word spread beyond the hospital tents to the front lines. Soldiers would whisper her name in disbelief. "The angel is still here." In letters smuggled out of the valley, they described a woman who seemed untouched by fear. A woman who would kneel in the mud, wiping the brow of a dying legionnaire, who would risk her life to deliver water when the shelling grew heaviest. Even the Viet Minh came to respect her presence. When the fortress finally fell, they made a point to treat her with courtesy. Throughout the final days, Genevieve helped oversee the evacuation of the most critical patients. She refused to leave until every man she could save was on a stretcher bound for Hanoi. When she finally stepped onto the evacuation aircraft, she was exhausted, hollowed out by weeks of relentless work. But she never once spoke of regret. To this day, she is remembered not as a combatant or a conqueror, but as a healer who upheld her duty when everything else had collapsed. On May 7th, 1954, the last shots echoed through the valley. Dien Bien Phu had fallen. For France, it was the end of an era, a defeat so complete that it shattered the illusion of colonial dominance. Over 10,000 French soldiers were taken prisoner. Thousands more were dead. The impact rippled through history. Within months, the Geneva Accords divided Vietnam into North and South, laying the groundwork for the Vietnam War. But in the midst of this catastrophe, Genevieve's story stood apart. When she returned to France, she was greeted as a symbol of courage. Crowds lined the airport to see the nurse who had become a legend. Newspapers hailed her as L'Ange, the angel who never wavered. She was awarded the Légion d'honneur, the Croix de Guerre, and the Médaille de la Valeur Militaire. Yet she never considered herself a hero. Her only wish was that more lives could have been saved. Geneviève de Gallard's story is not just a tale of war. It is a reminder that even in humanity's darkest hours, there are those who choose compassion over fear. Today, as we look back on the wars that shaped the modern world, her example endures. It is a testament to the quiet power of dedication and empathy. History will remember the battles, but we must also remember the healers, the ones who stayed behind to care for the broken when they could have saved themselves. This is why Geneviève de Galard remains, in every sense, an unsung hero.